Greetings, friends, and in this episode, we're going to run an important emerging skill, frankly, for many of us, especially with AI in the horizon, and that's called performance consulting, an area we really need to dive deeper into to help our organizations move from a training mindset to one of performance and identifying the outcomes. Ryan Sarpalius is our guest. He's going to go deeper into the methodology and some wonderful practical application. Give a listen. All right, friends, welcome back to another Performance Matters podcast series. Bob Mosher here, one of your co-hosts that you graciously put up with every once in a while when we get these out. This is all about performance and the shift to a performance mindset, deliverable, impact, all those wonderful things. I can't think of a better guest in the world we live in today and all that L&D is under and being asked to do. We're going to talk about a muscle we don't exercise enough, if not a skill we don't even know. I know it wasn't in my pedigree, and that's this amazing world of what's called performance consulting. So Ryan Sarpalius, friend, is an honor to have you here and appreciate the expertise and dialogue you're going to bring today.
Yeah, absolutely. So glad to be here, Bob. I'm so thankful for you and for Con and the team. And I've grown a ton in this world with a lot of your help. So thank you. Really
Wow.
glad to be here.
Oh, gracious, kind words. Well, but likewise, we've watched you do some remarkable work over the years, friend. And you are actually, we'll get to this toward the end, but you're actually teaching this new offering in our academy side on performance consulting relative to the 5 moments of need and relative to performance. We'll get to that in a bit. So let's back up a little bit. A lot of people are familiar with training. Clearly, like I said earlier, that was my pedigree, including
hmm
like an advanced degree in it, but not so much performance consulting and what that means outside of the order taker, if I may, that we've kind of fallen into. But the world we're pulled into, AI, ROI, all these things. What is performance consulting and how is it different from how a listener may consider the world of training?
Yeah, absolutely. And I got into this world in the same way, kind of asking some similar questions. Training is often seen as the automatic answer to performance problems. People aren't doing X, so let's train them more. And performance consulting really flips that. So it's about stepping back and asking, what's the real business challenge? Is it knowledge, skills, workflow, tools, et cetera? There's a lot that goes into that. So then we can come along as solution providers and build really tailored solutions. So that might include training, but it often
Hmm.
includes other things in terms of process improvement. Maybe it's digital support, whatever that is. So it's really less about delivering content and more about delivering outcomes.
Yeah, I love that. And again, we become so myopic on our deliverables. We hate the I want 5 days of training on,
hmm
when our stakeholders walk in our room. And you're talking about really changing the narrative from saying, sure, how long do I have? When can I get my SMEs? Right? So why? I think we're at a crossroads, friend. So why does performance consulting matter so much now? Why do you think
hmm
it's really? I think we probably should have always done it, frankly, but I don't know if we've been asked to or saw it as important. Why do you think the moons are aligning right now?
Yeah, I think there's obviously you mentioned AI. There's lots of other reasons why organizations are pressured to do more with less, right? Less time, less budget, fewer people. So, training that gets created that doesn't really hit the mark ends up being a
Mm,
waste and it doesn't really solve the issue. So it's a cost. And often we don't see that till the end. We don't see that until we've delivered training and we go back and look and see, man, we missed the mark or we got part of what we needed to accomplish, but we ended up maybe building something that's not what's needed. And to your point, there's a lot of us who know training. I'm partly in this world because I'm not a rocket scientist. I could kind of understand this and then really start to dive in. And so a lot of folks come and say, hey, I think we need more training for this. And they're obviously well intentioned. But performance consulting is really making sure that each of the interventions we would come up with are really tailored toward a business results. And so that common language is what is really important to share with a business stakeholder or with a client, because you're really trying to get to that ultimate outcome that's going to save them time, get the performance they need. And so training can be part of that solution, but it's important to be consultative in a
mm,
focus on performance and understand, hey, we both have a shared outcome here. And it's not just high quality training or a number of people who can participate in training. It's really about that shared outcome. And so if you can get there, this performance consulting mentality allows you to get to an arrived kind of shared outcome faster. And so you're going to end up honestly with fewer errors, faster delivery, right? Safer operations, all the things that you might want to go accomplish. So it's really about making sure that, L&D is moving the needle on what leaders care about really at the end of the day, not just what they're caring to ask you about as a training professional.
yeah, let's go into that training thing a little bit, right? So I think a lot of training professionals think that we do solve performance problems.
Yeah.
Because how could knowledge and practice and training not beget that? I get it, but how, when only relying on training, how does that affect our ability to solve performance problems? Why is it maybe not enough?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of times we don't think too much. We the collectively don't think enough about really what workflow is, what workflow learning would look like, what workflow outcomes are. We think about knowledge and skill will help somebody do what they need to do. And it's maybe because again, a lot of us think of training as what we came up through education and the school systems and whatever else. If I
Sure.
go and I sit and I get the training, I come out, I can do it. And the reality is, as an adult learner who's working in a operational environment, or you're trying to go do something on the job, just the way we get our work done is different. And so I think it's a bit of a misconception up front about what does the workflow really mean? What does it really mean to do your job effectively? Even thinking in terms of performance, obviously, you would hope a stakeholder comes to you and they're thinking in those terms, but oftentimes they're not connecting performance outcomes to the idea of
Mm,
how training matters. And so they think knowledge and skill equals performance outcomes. And so a lot of times you're trying to help them just rethink that a little bit and think a little bit more clearly about the fact that there's so much that goes into those performance outcomes. Training is a part, but there's a lot more
hmm
to it than that.
I think part of that disconnect has been the ROI
Mm,
thing, right? We've
yep.
chased for
Yep.
so long. And even though they ask us for training, because they kind of do think that's what they want, or at least that's what the deliverable is to what they want, at the end, they kind of circle back to us and didn't get those business impacts, right? It didn't.
Yep.
And it's really hard to point to an event or training as a causation, not correlation to those things, right? So important. You mentioned that you kind of warmed into this, and knowing you in your career and have worked with you for so long, you're one of the early adopters of 5 moments. You saw the importance of performance. What were some defining moments, Ryan, in your career when you realized that training alone wasn't enough? What got you into this?
Yeah. I think that the first place that it really popped up for me in this way of thinking was realizing, kind of to your point, that people weren't really seeing the value in training. And as I thought back, or I would reflect on the things that my team would produce, and I'm reflecting on what is it we're doing, and is that really having an impact? And I honestly didn't have a great answer either. I said, hey, this is
Hmm
great training, the quality is great, we're doing it, fast, but I'm not really sure we're getting the outcome we need. And so honestly, that concept of enabling performance was a big deal for me
Mm,
early in my career, before I really even pivoted into true L&D. The whole concept of the forgetting curve really sunk in with me.
yeah.
And I'm like, that makes
Yeah.
sense. And that makes sense to non-learning professionals. They get it, right?
Mm,
You come to training and you walk out of training. And if you tell someone, hey, when you leave this training, chances are you're going to forget X amount of what you've learned. Everyone says, yeah, you're right. I do forget what I learned in training. So I think that resonated for me as just a non-learning professional at first. But then being able to come in and say, on the flip side of this, we're looking for these performance outcomes, but really training can't solve all of those things. And when I first got into this, I was in a very high risk, high consequence, people die if they don't get it right kind of environment with the
mm.
utility. And my thought was, if the training is not good enough and something so severe happens, I just need a better framework for that. I need a better methodology. I need to feel more confident in what we're doing. And so that concept of really enabling performance to me was, that's what we can do. We can enable the performance. We can't
Mm.
force it. We can't make it happen. But a lot of times training and those outcomes are tied together. And so I really thought through, man, if I can think about it in performance language and outcomes and enablements, that actually makes me feel a lot freer to come up with better solutions and really chase the same outcomes as these partners I'm working with.
Yeah, brilliant. I think I'll always come here, have those moments, right? When we
Mm.
lie in bed at night wondering about whether our training was good enough. So you really emphasize the relationship between the consultant and the stakeholder. And we've had other podcasts about this, that the corner we're kind of painted into with our stakeholders, those we're allowed to talk to, or even how they perceive our relationship, even if they are a senior decision maker and stuff, they kind of have us in a box. Why do you emphasize that relationship from a learning consultant perspective? And what does it look like in practice? How is it different than maybe how training is traditionally partnered with our stakeholders?
Yeah, good question. I think it's really important. I think in my experience, a lot of the stakeholders you're working with, as much as they, again, think they know training, they really don't know training. That's not their world. And so often they're looking for, how is this measurable? What is the ROI? What's the outcome I'm getting out of this? And really the only way you can answer that question is if you know their business, if you know them
Mm,
from a what matters to them kind of perspective, and you have that shared language. Even if they're trying to be helpful and they're not poking at your solutions, they're going to be asking questions about, well, how do I know this is really making a difference? And I found
Yep.
they're just trying to be helpful, honestly. They want to ask good questions. And so if you can speak that language and speak their language, it goes a long way. It's makes all the difference in the world if you can speak that language for them. And so that's partly where that involves often building a partnership. You got to spend time learning your business. You have to understand the metrics
Mm.
and the language and the way that your stakeholders think about outcomes in order to then connect that language back to what it is you're providing. And so I think that's part of its partnership in terms of getting to build a relationship. A lot of it is just seeking to understand, like any good relationship, right? You want to know them, you want to know what makes them tick, you want to know what they care about, so that you really are seen as a partner in what you're trying to do, versus that order taker mentality where you bring a certain service, but they're perceiving the value before they even come to you.
Yeah, it definitely puts us in a different narrative. And I found I wasn't as intentional as you've helped us become. And again, I think the workshop you've made for us is brilliant at that. But what I did learn early on is if you start broadening the dialogue to performance, business outcomes, and so on, they start realizing that training probably isn't enough.
Hmm.
And you better have a better mousetrap, right? You better,
Right.
if you're going to
Yep.
open up if you're going to start performance consulting on the front end of your analysis, you better be ready for a different solution. So our listeners are very often still very, I was going to say mired, but that sounds so negative, but they're still they're seen as, and their primary deliverable is training. Can you give us a real world example of how performance consulting uncovered a different solution than just
Mhm.
training? And so they can kind of walk through what that narrative or what
Yeah.
that might be like.
Yeah, absolutely. So the one that comes to mind when I think about that question is I've worked a lot in customer facing organizations and operational. And so we had a very large contact center kind of environment. And a request came our way to do some more product and process training. And that was the request. Hey, we need to build some more training. And we just asked some more questions about why, what do you need that for? What are you trying to solve? Because we can go build that, but kind of what's the outcome? And as we dug deeper, we really found the issue was customer satisfaction was the main thing they were trying to drive. We're like, hey, our customer satisfaction is down. We think it's because our people don't have
Mm,
enough information. And so we dove in and actually found as we sat, obviously did some shadowing. So all the glorious stuff that comes out of the 5 moments of need framework, it's the workflow analysis, it's sitting side by side, and just realized that one, it was really cumbersome tools. So there was some process that really you had to go to multiple systems to get through one kind of, part of your workflow. And we thought there's probably
mm,
a better solution there. And that's not training. That's a bit of maybe an engineering or an IT,
yep.
solve. And the other was the incentives. These reps were incentivized to get through that call as quickly as possible. And
Mm,
there was not an equal incentive on, the way their performance was measured when it comes to things like quality. So why would they pursue quality if really speed is the main outcome? And so we did
mm,
implement some training. So there still was an element of training to kind of make sure we were closing knowledge gaps, but really that performance focus and saying, what are you trying to do? Kind of shift us back to let's partner with you to come up with a solution. And that ended up putting some projects on the roadmap for IT. And so to your point, we can't go solve everything. Part of sometimes in this role, you feel like you're creating more problems than you're solving because you're finding all these other things that really you're not going to go solve. But it's back to building that partnership and saying, hey, we can do this for you. But I also see this as a potential blocker. And so let's have a conversation there. And that kind of lights people up in terms of, you're right, let's go pursue that
mm.
as well. And so in that particular case, we got some product stuff on the roadmap. We changed a little bit the way we thought about quality and performance metrics. And so that again was helpful. So the next time they came to us, it was really, hey, we think we need training, but we'd love to have a conversation with you. And so it was just incremental. And over time, you start to build that credibility with those stakeholders.
So I want to go more into that last part,
Yeah.
which was I think we have to go deeper on, is that we love the more training request.
Hmm.
We I think it's indicative of a problem, frankly, if you step back and think about it. But at the same time, we're loved, we're paid, we got work to do. They walk in and say, I want more training on.
Hmm.
And what you're talking about is us taking a breath, not just going, sure. How do you reshape, reframe that stakeholder when our impulse is, and we've got the fish on the hook, why not reel them in, right? But
Sure.
it's going to be a rewiring of our
Yep.
thinking and the narrative. Because I'm sure the stakeholder thinks we're going to go, sure. What's your advice in reframing that, Ryan?
Yeah, I think that one thing is maybe depending on where you are kind of in this journey is maybe trying to start small. So, I wouldn't push back on every project that comes in or try to go create some massive, ecosystem of this a digital coach and workflow, full workflow solution like right out of the gate. I think what really has worked for me is finding pockets where you can start to implement more workflow learning solutions and more digital coach kind of concepts into existing solutions. So for example, if someone comes and says, hey, we want a web-based training and we want to do some classroom training on X, I would say great. And I would follow along this methodology to say, well, what are the areas where maybe someone's going to forget something, or maybe there's a lot of complexity, or maybe there's not a number of steps they need to go through. And so kind of using our methodology and our tools to say, this would be a good use case for me to put this in a job aid and take it out of the training. And you start to kind of articulate why. From my perspective, you're still giving them a training solution, but usually
Yeah.
you're complementing that with some performance support. And again, I would say every situation is different, but finding those ways to kind of start small, it starts to demonstrate that you've got the know-how and the expertise,
Mm.
frankly, to help that stakeholder with, look, I'm really trying to help this person get to the performance they need. I think it's training, maybe it's training plus this. And what you're doing on the back end is maybe you're actually making your training a little bit more optimal, right? Or you're making
Sure.
it maybe shorter, more streamlined, or more effective, or whatever it might be. And so I think it's really looking for those ways to find wins and build that credibility over time. In an ideal world, Bob, you're measuring all of that and you're able to say, look, here's what we had before, here's what we ended up with. We actually did maybe a more reduced training or a more optimized solution, and we still got you that same outcome. Here's how we did that. So next time the request comes around or the next project you get on, you're kind of building off of the success, but you're leading with the metrics. The worst place you want to be, and you and I have been in these situations, is a stakeholder
Yep.
coming to you saying, why are we paying you to do all this training? Seems like you're not
Yep.
adding a lot of value. You want to be ahead of that conversation, not on the back end
You
of it.
do.
And so those are a couple of ways to try to chip away at that proactively.
If you don't mind, can I run a little deeper at measurement?
Yeah.
Boy, I got caught in a box with that, and I think you outlined it perfectly. The narrative is almost always reactive, because the elephant in the room, I think, is everyone knows, even the person asking for the more training, that it probably isn't enough. But in
Hmm.
the end, 3 months, 6 months later, people aren't performing. They're not hitting whatever and stuff, and they come back and then they go, why didn't training work? Help us with measures that come out of performance consulting, or in our EN of enable. People know that in this podcast. And then the
Hmm.
E of enable is evaluate, engage to align, evaluate. And again, I think it's another muscle where we get analytics, data, measurement.
Sure.
Can you give us a little more framing around that from a performance perspective?
Yeah, I've had the benefit of honestly working at some great companies that have a ton of muscle to go get data and build the analytics. And what's funny is even with all of that capability, it's often hard to connect the dots between what you're actually trying to measure. So I wouldn't always equate, I don't have the engineering capacity to go get this data, so I can't do a measurement. I think it's really about framing the conversation to your point. So really, when any request pops up, a project comes up for whatever reason, you're really looking at kind of at a macro level. It really is taking, the Kirkpatrick, let's say, and kind of reversing that. So what is the ultimate outcome we're looking for? And then if we think about, okay, that's the business outcome, what performance metrics relate to that outcome? And it's funny how you'll find, I think, in my experience, sometimes you ask that question and the person coming to you with the request often can't answer that question.
Right,
They have a
right.
hard
It's
time saying,
amazing.
I don't know how this particular performance metric really impacts that long-term thing. We just believe that it does. And at the end of the day, you might say, okay, at least we all know that we don't know, and that's fine. We can work toward that. But I think by asking those questions early, and really the methodology and the tool set that's a part of the methodology to me is so helpful in terms of really, and I'm not trying to just go sell the methodology. I've honestly found it so valuable to say, let me just plug in the answers to these different questions and really
Yep.
walk it all the way back down to what this individual needs. And that really frames the recommendations. And so it's a little bit more grounded in an outcome. So back to your point about measurement, I think that's where you start is that conversation. And then along the way, you're saying, great, where is that data? Who owns that data? Can we get access to
Yep.
that data? I'd love to see that. And again,
Yep.
that can be a challenge. I would say maybe encourage the listeners as well. There's going to be times where you get a bit of a stiff arm on that data. Why do we want to spend up somebody's time to go get you a report or run a query or whatever? And that's okay. I think it's really, though, at least you know what you're looking for. Someone somewhere is measuring the data they care about, right? In any business environment,
I love
someone is
that.
looking at that. And so it's really asking, how do we get that? How can I find it? Can I do a lift, right? Can I make sense of it? Just give me the raw data. I'll go play around with Excel or whatever I need to do to find some kind of insight out of that. But I think it's really, if you know what you're looking for and then making the ask for that data. And over time, you can start to get that and really start to inform more of a data-driven approach or a metrics-driven approach.
Hmm. Where a question is coming up a lot with AI is, what is the emerging roles in L&D?
Mhm.
Or what are the changing roles in L&D? Or what other competencies does an L&D professional have to have beyond what we know of today? And I absolutely think this is sitting in the bullseye, what we're
Hmm.
talking about here. Because AI, I think, will allow us to provide other services that, frankly, right now we just don't have the time to do, let
Sure.
alone the understanding that you're pointing out. If I'm a learning leader out there listening right now, Ryan, and my team is struggling with this, I'm struggling with this role as the leader to define how would I know if I need performance consulting instead of more training in the first place? How do I help my team understand that and embrace this role?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that if you are finding that you're building a lot of training, but you're not really sure whether it's having an impact, first of all, I mean, I think obviously if you're being told we don't think this is having an impact,
Yeah, sure.
then that's one way. But there's some cases, and I've been in these environments where it's like I think we're doing the right thing. People seem to like it. And then I think there's an element of, okay, well, how do you know that's really having the impact? And maybe the question is, can you or your team answer those questions about what is the
Hmm.
performance, even just that question, anytime you roll something out, well, what's the performance outcome this is aimed at? Asking questions around workflow, performance, outcomes just starts to shift the language a little bit. With every team I've ever led, I've got that one slide that just has training crossed out and performance right next to it. And it's like, we got to shift the
Mm,
mentality away from training and toward performance. And so I think maybe the question to ask yourself is if you're not talking in the language of performance, then it's worth investing some time in understanding like, well, why is that? And I bet, and you'd probably find more often than not, when you sit down and really pull it all apart, like, yeah, you are thinking about performance. You do care about those outcomes. We don't build training just for training's sake. I think a lot of people I've worked with really care about making an impact and making a difference. And so if your language is not performance language, that's one good indicator. It's probably worth spending some time
mm,
diving into whether or not you need this. And then I think the second big category is if you have stakeholders who either treat you as an order taker,
yeah.
or are scrutinizing the value of what you're doing. Those are another
Yep.
couple of pieces where you'd want to say, okay, I want to make sure that I'm having a seat at the table, so to speak, with these folks and speaking their language to really articulate the value of what we're doing. If you don't have that, and we always use that seat at the table phrase, but you know what I mean? If you don't have that
Yeah, yeah.
partnership, you don't have that seat at the table, then that could be a good indicator. Am I speaking and is my team speaking in the language of performance that resonates with my stakeholders?
I love the language of performance. That's really powerful. Yeah, and we're not walking away from training, right?
Mm,
I think that's sometimes a misunderstanding of even the 5 moments that there are 5 moments. You know,
yeah,
we so pound apply, we so pound change and solve because that is where performance lives and where
yeah,
impact is measured and where I think where our muscle is weak, but there's still new and more,
yeah, yep.
right? It's
What
just been the tip of the sword, right?
what I love about this methodology, honestly, is we all know that formal training, if we're going to call it that, so that's in person, online, whatever, is just expensive. But
Yeah.
the reality is this methodology, this has been another big win for me in my career, is it actually helps figure out what can we take out of training so that we
Yeah.
make what the time we are spending on the right things. So it's
Love that.
actually, hey, if you really want somebody to build this skill and have it to this level of capability, we cannot add all the other 15 things you think they need to know. We just can't because you're going to dilute. And again, this is language that kind of makes sense to people. They're like, yeah, it makes sense. If you put it all in, if everything's important, nothing's important, right? That kind of concept. And
Mm,
so that this methodology and this way of thinking to me really helps actually make better use of the formal training. It makes it a higher
yeah.
quality experience. It's really focused on application. Like you're really helping people make the most of that really expensive time because you have a solution for everything else. This is part of the challenges. If you, and this is back to the, try this out where you can. If you're not coming with recommendations on performance support and things that are kind of in the ecosystem of performance, all you have to lean on is formal training. And so much better to have the skills and the tools and the landscape to go kind of build that ecosystem than to get in and just build a lot of stuff into a training solution. It's just, we all know that's not going to be the best outcome. So it makes that formal training a much richer, effective experience if you can lean on this methodology.
Hmm. One of my favorite blog articles Con wrote quite a while ago, and it's in our website, friends, if you want to dig for it or so on. But it said how performance support saved the classroom.
Yep.
And exactly to your point, it wasn't about how performance support threatened the classroom or how it eliminated the classroom. It was like, look, the classroom is way oversteeped, way overloaded, asked
Mhm.
to do things it can't, and therefore unfairly measured or viewed. Let's let it do what it does brilliantly, but you have to have something else.
Yep.
Right. So I
Yep.
love it. So we're
Awesome.
so thrilled with this workshop, Ryan. Honestly, it again, the timing I think couldn't have been better. Those listening, give a listen because we'll have the workshop available shortly with public offerings and such. an absolute must, whether you're 5 ohms or not, candidly. I would
Yeah,
go. I would
great.
defend. Tell us about the workshop. What can people expect from participating?
Yeah, so it's really intended to give folks a practical hands-on way to really shift from that training first to performance first mentality. So it's going to start with why is that important, but then really walk through how we apply some of the
Mm,
5 moments of need methodology. But to your point, I think it's a great way that even if you're not steeped in 5 moments of need or you haven't been exposed to that, it includes a lot of those along the way. So it's not a
yep.
prerequisite that you're an expert there, but it is going to lean on the best of that methodology in terms of connecting it back to performance and really how, to your point, that engage to align stage is really important. Helps you really reframe problems in performance language. So I think by the end,
Mm,
participants aren't just like understanding performance consulting, but they actually come away with a methodology and a framework
mm,
and some tools to actually go immediately apply it. And the way it's built is, we want to make it real life. So we want you to bring a project and work through it. And so it's hopefully very eating our own dog food in a sense of
yeah.
how we use this. And I'll just say, it creates the space as well to learn from other professionals. So as we walked through it so far, and this is why I love this space as well, is just there's so many brilliant minds out there that have done it, in other ways, in other places, other situations, and that's so sharpening. So I think there's a lot of value in truly working through the exercises and everything else, with your peers, with other people, maybe across a different industry, but trying to plan the same methodology has been very sharpening. So it's another huge, huge win from the standpoint of just developing your own thinking in this space, much less the tools and the tactics.
Excellent. Friends, anyone listening would be fortunate to take this from you, friend. And thank you for bringing the rigor to it for us, bringing in the shape of the workshop, but also in the good work that you've done. Again, I can't emphasize enough. If there's ever a time in your career to build this muscle, it's now.
Hmm.
And I think the opportunity to do it more is coming. And so I think it's just such a remarkable thing. And thank you, Ryan, for all you do, what you've done to the methodology, and what you've brought to this workshop in particular. Can't thank you enough for that.
I appreciate that. It's a pleasure to be a part of it. And I love this space. So thank you so much for your generosity and your leadership, and excited to see what the future holds.
Well, thanks for today. Appreciate you, all you've said, and a lot to process. And I know people are going to get a lot out of it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, that's it for this episode of the 5 Moments of Need Performance Matters series. We look forward to future conversations around how to best put the 5 moments of need into practice. We welcome your feedback and can be reached on our 5 Moments of Need website, which is www.5momentsofneed.com. We hope you're finding these helpful and will subscribe to future episodes. Have a great day, friends.